Okay, so October is fast approaching, which means it is time for my October TBR. But first, a reminder that last week I released a video called My End of Year Goals. I have two new end of year goals that are going to surface beginning in October and ending in December of 2020. The first of those two goals is to complete open-ended series, and the second of those two goals was to read books that I had hauled prior to April 2020 that I want to give a chance to before I start doing a mass unhaul, which will be happening either at the end of December or the beginning of January. Let's keep those two goals in mind as we progress into what I'm going to read in the month of October 2020. So the first book I'm going to read in the month of October 2020 is the first book I'm going to read from my pre-April TBR. Now, I did a draw. I had a little bucket on me that I used. This is that bucket. And I ended up drawing out two books. We don't have those here because there were some issues in editing, so I do apologize about that. But I can show you at least what those books were. And the first book that I'm going to read for my pre-April TBR is this book, Vampire Kisses by Ellen Schreiber. So I was very excited when I drew this book out because it is such a small book. I have a lot of hefty books on this month's TBR, so it's good to always have a small one. Let's read a little bit about what this book is about, shall we? Raven lives in Dullsville, where nothing ever happens until now. The mansion on top of Benson Hill has been empty and boarded up for years, but a new family has moved in, a family that never ventures out during the day. Who are these creepy people, especially the handsome, dark, and elusive Alexander Sterling? Or rather, what are they? Could the town gossip actually be true? Are they vampires? Raven, who secretly covets a vampire kiss, both at the risk of her own mortality and Alexander's loving trust, is dying to uncover the truth. So I do like my fair share of vampire novels, and I'm sure that I'm going to enjoy this one too. In fact, a very quick backstory. When I was working at my place of work prior to the pandemic, with the pandemic occurring, my store had to temporarily close down, and in Melbourne, Australia, we are still in lockdown, so I'm still waiting to return back to that store. But when I was there, I was talking to a friend of mine, and we started talking about books. When I told her some of the genres that I love, she recommended this one, so I'm happy to finally get on to this book. The second book that I plan to read in October 2020 is my first Murphy Napier Buddy Read Book of the Month book, which is this book. This is How You Lose the Time War by Amal L. Motor and Max Gladstone. So this book is an adult sci-fi. It is 200 pages long, which makes it a novelette, and my second short book of the month. Again, there are long books coming, so I really appreciate the short start to the month. So, from what I remember about this book, the premise is that it follows two females who are in separate armies that are competing against each other in a war, who are writing each other notes to try and find a way to end this war as amicably as they can. It sounds interesting, and I'm really looking forward to reading it. I'm also looking forward to getting back into the Murphy Napier Buddy Read Book Club, because I read another book last month, or this month I should say, with that club, and Murphy has an amazing Discord server where we can all talk about this stuff, and it was just a whole lot of fun. I'm going to leave the details of Murphy Napier's Patreon account, where you can join her if you want to buddy read with her as well, in the description below. All the money that she does raise over on Patreon is going to fund an adoption for her second child, for her and her husband, both of whom are just beautiful people with beautiful souls, so give that they may be able to do such a beautifully nice thing. The third book that I plan on reading this month is going to help me tick off another one of my goals, which is the first one I was talking to you about with my end of year goals to complete open-ended series. And that book that I'm going to be reading is this book, Starsight by Brandon Sanderson. This is the second book in the Skyward series. I don't know what that series is called, but I read Skyward this month and I thought it was pretty good. I'll talk to you more about that with my monthly wrap coming up in a couple of days' time. This is the second book in that series. Now, at the time of filming, books 3 and Books 3 and 4 are not available, so they will become available in 2021 and 2022 respectively. So while I'm not officially completing the series, I am going to be up to date with what has been published of this series by reading this book. So yay, another goal to tick off. Very quick premise of the first book, Skyward, because if I talk about anything to do with this book, it'll be a spoiler for that one. But the first book, Skyward by Brandon Sanderson, follows a girl by the name of Spencer who very early on in chapter 1, so it's not a spoiler, goes off in a spaceship with her father, and while they are there, at one point, Spencer's father tells her to go back because he and his crew of people who are in their own spaceships are being attacked by an alien race known as the Krell. Unfortunately, Spencer's father dies very early on in chapter 1. Again, it's not a spoiler. And the crew come back and basically say that Spencer's father died a cowardly death. Because of this and the rumours involved with the supposed cowardly death of her father, Spencer is treated very differently. But she is willing to do anything and everything that she can to walk in the same footsteps as her father. Will she succeed? Find out by reading book number 1. This is book 2. I'm looking forward to reading it. The third book that I'm going to read in October of 2020 is the second pre-April TBR book that I selected from this random draw. So again, unfortunately, I can't do it now because I did it in that first video. But hopefully in November, you can actually see me draw out these things. But that book that I ended up drawing out was this book, Chosen Ones by Veronica Roth. So recently I read Divergent and Insurgent, which are the first 2 books in the Divergent series, and I really loved Divergent, so I'm hoping I'll love this book as much. Let's read a little bit about what it says on the back. Now, this is a TBR. I'll leave what I mean by TBR right down there so you can see a little definition for yourself. But let's read what's on the back of this book. It says, saving the world once made them heroes, saving it again might destroy them. So it has me intrigued, and being Veronica Roth, who is brilliant, she is a mastermind at world building, especially with dystopian books. I'm really looking forward to reading this to see what this world is like. So the fourth book I'm going to read in the month of October 2020 is this book, The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. This is the second Murphy Napier Buddy Reads Book Club book of the month that I'm going to be reading. It is an adult historical fiction and it is 521 pages long, which makes it a tome. A very quick idea of the premise of this book is that it revolves around a guy who holds the very last copy of his book titled The Shadow of the Wind, and because it is the last remaining book, he's trying to do something in order to get the book out there, something like that. It's to do with the fact that he is holding the final book that exists, and the reason that it is the final one that exists is because all the others have been, I believe they were burnt, they were destroyed, but I believe they were burnt in a fire or something, some other heresy like that. You guys know I don't like damaging of books, so to have our hero protagonist trying to do what he can with this last remaining copy of that book makes me genuinely enthralled to read something like this. So that is the second Murphy Napier Buddy Read book of the month, and I'm looking forward to reading it. The sixth book I'm going to read in October of 2020 is the thriller of the month, and that book is not going to tick off any goals other than it's October. I wanted to read something a little dark, and so I've chosen this book, The Guest List by Lucy Foley. This is an adult thriller. It is 384 pages long, which makes it a half tome. And so the very little that I know about this book, because you don't want to know a lot about thrillers going in, is that this book begins at a wedding reception where everyone seems to be having a good time. everyone entered into the wedding reception alive, but not everyone's going to make it out alive. That is more than enough for me to want to read this book. But if you want to add a little more intrigue, for me personally, my least favourite trope of all time is the travelling/questing trope, especially when you don't know where you're going to and you don't know how you're going to get there. Tolkien. So, I'm looking forward to reading this book because it sounds like we're going to be contained in one room with the setting of this book. So, yay! No need to travel for a book to be written. Hello! I really hope that this is a 5-star book, because if it is, I'm going to need to do a video on how we don't need to go on massive, grand quests in order to have an amazing book. So good luck, Lucy Foley. So that's the halfway mark. Let's move on to book number 7. The 7th book that I plan to read this month is helping me to tick off a goal that I actually had in January of 2020, so always a plus. And that was to read at least 2 books that you guys, my subscribers, recommended for me to read. I have already done that with one book, which is, I'll put a picture of that up there, The Bizarre Book of Bad Dreams by Stephen King. Thank you to that subscriber. I had a pretty good time reading that book. So this book that another subscriber has recommended is The Forests of Silence, the first book in the Delta Quest series by Emily Rodda. Now, I want to premise my discussion about this book by saying that despite the fact that this is the first book in a series, I am reading it as a standalone. So if I do love this series, I will read book 2 in 2021. I don't want to open up new series, but I can look at this book as a standalone and kind of just go from there. It's a loophole. I'm going to take the loophole, make my move, read the book. So, this is a middle grade fantasy, and it is 120 pages long, which makes it a novelette. Let's read a little bit about what it's about, shall we? By looking at the blurb. And the blurb says, Deltora is a land of monsters and magic. The evil Shadow Lord is plotting to invade Deltora and enslave its people. All that stands against him is the magic belt of Deltora, with its 7 gems of great and mysterious power. When the gems are stolen and hidden in dark, terrible places throughout the kingdom, the Shadow Lord triumphs and Deltora is lost. There is more on the blurb, but I don't need to read more than that to be excited about this. I know that middle grades are filled with plot conveniences, but boy, does this sound like a really good premise. And I want to say a big thank you, a massive thank you to that subscriber for recommending this book to me. Yee! I'll let you know how I go, subscriber. So, the next book that I plan on reading is going to fulfill one of those goals that I had from last week, from my end of year goals, which is the goal of completing series. And I'm definitely going to be completing a series with this book, because this is the final book, published or no. This is the last book in that series. I'm referring to the Arc of a Scythe series, which you can see those books conveniently right there. So book number 1 on the here is Scythe, and book number 2 here is Thunderhead. Book number 3 is The Toll by Neil Shusterman. So I, again, can't really say much about this book because, again, it's going to include spoilers. So let's discuss a little bit about book 1, Scythe, to see if that gets you hooked. And if it does, I highly recommend you read it because it's a really good series. Well, at least what I've read so far. So Scythe by Neil Shusterman is book 1 in the Arc of a Scythe series, and it follows it is set in a world where death literally has ceased to exist. And so because of that, this world is run by a massive group of scythes whose job it is to literally go out and kill people, to ensure that people will somehow die. When I say death has literally ceased to exist, what I mean by this is any kind of natural death. In fact, I do believe, though don't quote me on it, that if a standard human tried to kill another standard human in this world, that they wouldn't die. They would still have to deal with all the pain and everything that comes with the agony and all that stuff with that, but they wouldn't die unless the scythe themselves actually killed them. So in book 1, one of the scythes recruits 2 humans to see if one of them can become a scythe. The advantage to that and to having the book done that way by Neil Shusterman is that we, the reader, get to learn about this world through the eyes of these two recruited interns. And it was just incredible. Book 2 was okay. I gave book 1 5 stars. I gave book 2 4 stars. But the way that book 2 Thunderhead ended, Neil Shusterman is a master at cliffhangers, because that final climax was amazing. So I'm really looking forward to reading book number 3, because I can't wait to see how things are going to continue on after how they left off with book number 2. That was long enough a rant. Let's move on to the next book. The next book that I plan to read in October of 2020 is this book, Misery by Stephen King. It makes sense. I have no other reason to read this book other than the fact that it's October and I should read a horror. So before I go on to discuss a little bit about this book, I do want to premise it by saying that I am actually going to be hosting a buddy read of my own, and this is going to be one of the Mr. Francy buddy reads books of the month. So if you'd like to join me over with my buddy read group, we have a group on Facebook. It is absolutely free to join, so if you have Facebook, check out the link in the description below and come along and join us. It's going to be a blast. Anyway, this book is an adult horror. It is 369 pages long, which makes it a half tome, and this book revolves around our protagonist Paul Sheldon, who in this fictional world is a very well-renowned author who has written a very popular series called Misery. One day, while driving with his latest manuscript for the series Misery, Paul ends up in an accident. I believe there's a blizzard, and he is rescued by a fan of his. But there is more to this fan than meets the eye. So not very recently actually at all, but in February of 2020, I read this book that you can hardly see, my favourite book of the year, The Final Empire. It says Mistborn on the cover, but it's actually The Final Empire. I don't know why the publishers are writing Mistborn, but you don't need me to harp on, so I'll stop rambling now. I read this book in February of 2020, and while I absolutely loved it, there's something that occurs about 3/4 of the way through my favourite book of the year that had me boiling mad, to the point that I wanted to reenact Misery with this author, Brandon Sanderson. So the fact that I've been thinking about this book since February of 2020, well, just goes to show that it is high time that I read this book. I'm looking forward to it. We'll see how we go, but come join us over in the Buddy Read group over on Facebook, because it's going to be a lot of fun. Again, the link is in the description, so join us. The next book that I'm going to read, because I've got 13 books that I'm going to read this month, which is absolutely insane, but the next book that I'm going to read for October 2020 will come with a massive asterisk. What this means is that at the time of filming, I don't know if I'm actually going to read this book or not, but I already have a substitute for it, so if I need to substitute, I will. But at this stage, the next book that I'm going to read in October of 2020 is this book, The Indigo Spell by Rochelle Mead. This is a YA urban fantasy and is 401 pages long, which makes it a half tome. If I do end up reading this book, it will help me to continue to try and complete this series, which is the Bloodline series. You can see that book right there. So I read that book in 2 months ago, so August, and I gave that book 5 stars. I'm currently reading book number 2. I'll put a picture of it up there, called The Golden Lily. I am about 3/4 of the way through that book right now, and I just don't know how I feel about it. So if I end up DNFing this series, then of course I won't read this book. But if I don't, then I will get into this book. Now, unlike the other series, open-ended series books that I've been talking about in this video, I can't tell you guys much about this book at all, because not only is it book 3 in a series, but it is book 3 in a spin-off series to an original series called The Vampire Academy. So I really can't say anything at all about this, but what I can say about the original series Vampire Academy is that it follows a Dumpier by the name of Rose Hathaway. Now, a Dumpier is a half vampire, half human who, in book 1, is training to become a guardian to a Moroi, which is the name given to the royal vampires of that Vampire Academy world, by the name of Vasilisa. That series was pretty good. I ended up giving that series, all the 6 books in total, 3 3 stars and 3 5 stars. It ended very solidly. So we'll see how we go with this one. But if I do end up DNFing Bloodlines, I'm going to put this book down because then I won't read this book. Then instead I'm going to pick up this book, which is Allegiant by Veronica Roth. This is the 3rd book in the Divergent series. I gave Divergent 5 stars and I don't know what I gave Insurgent, so I'll have to check that, recheck what I gave that, but I gave it less than 5 stars. So either way, I'm going to either read this book or that book, and either way, it's going to be the 3rd book in a series. If it's this one, it will get me halfway through a series. If it's that one, then it should get me through the series. There is one more book in the Divergent series called 4, but I don't know if I'm interested in that book. So if I read this one, I'm going to consider the series to be done. If I don't read this one in October of 2020, here's a spoiler for you, I will read it in November. So now let's move on to the next book that I'm going to be reading in the month of October 2020. And this book I'm only going to be listening to as an audiobook. I don't have a physical copy of it on me, and I'm just going to read it because it seems like it's going to be a short read, which is why I'm fitting it into my TBR, but that's not the reason why I'm picking it. The reason why I want to listen to this audiobook is because of a twist that it has that just sounds like the ticket I need. This book is called All Systems Red by Martha Wells. So the little that I have of the stats of this book is that it is an adult sci-fi book. It is 152 pages long, which makes it a pamphlet. This book revolves around a robot by the name of Murderbot, who has been created for the reason that his name does suggest. He was created to murder people, but unlike what he was made for, Murderbot is only interested in one thing, and that is soap operas. I mean, I love this, so I'm just really looking forward to reading a comical book about a robot that's meant to be killing people, but really doesn't want to. He just wants to watch his soap operas. That sounds good enough to me, so what do you think about that? Do you want to buddy read that with me? I'm thinking about putting this book up as our 2nd buddy read for the Mr. Francy Buddy Read Book Club. So now we're going to talk about the final 2 books, he said in quotes, that I'm going to read for this month. Now, it's 2 books because that's how you get it in Australia, but overseas it is a 1-book binder. So it's honestly really confusing to me as to why it has to be 2 books in Australia, but once I finish reading these 2 books, I'm going to unhaul them and I'm going to purchase the 1-book binder. So that book, even though it's 2 for me this month, that book is called The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. So this is the first book in the Stormlight archives. So this year in 2020, I read, as I've already alluded to earlier, Mistborn in the Brandon Sanderson series. It's right there. And I then, this month, read what I'm calling a speed hump. It was meant to be a standalone book. There is going to be more, but they're not going to be published for quite a while. And that book I'm reading this month is Warbreaker. I'll put a picture of it up there. And so after reading Warbreaker, I always planned in October. I planned this in like March or April to read this series. I'm going to start the Stormlight Archives. The reason why I was hesitant to start this series is because every book in this series is at least 1,000 pages long. So let's split them into 2 books. Actually, first I'm going to show you a very quick picture of how these 2 books, even though they're 2 books here, are actually meant to be a 1-book binder. There's your proof. Excuse me. But now let's talk about them individualistically. So this is The Way of Kings Part 1. It is an adult fantasy and it is 594 pages long, which makes it a tome. And this is The Way of Kings Part 2, again an adult fantasy, and it is 525 pages long, which again makes it a tome. So when you add the 2 together, you get 1,119 pages, which makes it a double tome. So Intentionally, I'm looking at it as one book. However, for my end of year total, they will count as two because I have them as two. But yeah, it's going to be my first double tome book for the year, so wish me luck. But that is all the books that I plan on reading in the month of October 2020. We're now going to cut over to a video of me showing you a quick statistical look at the goals that I'm going to fulfill for this month in a very nice edited little way. So we'll jump over there and do that, and then we'll be back to wrap things up. Okay, so here are the 3 goals I'm trying to hit for October to December 2020. For my completing open-ended series, this month I have the last published book in the Skyward series, the last book in the Arc of a Scythe series, and potentially the 3rd book in the Bloodline series. For my books from my subscribers, we have The Forests of Silence, and for my pre-April TBR, I'm reading Vampire Kisses and Chosen Ones. So, these are some of the books that I plan to read in the month of October 2020. I hope you have a wonderful reading month. What are you going to be reading? Let me know in the comments section below. But in the meantime, I'm going to leave that there. I'm just going to hold this here. That was for the photo we're doing for the cover. You know, editing's not as fun as it looks. But we are going to leave that there, and I'm going to let you guys go with peace, blessings, and so much love. I post videos every Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, and Sunday, and I will see you again soon. Mwah! Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, hit that bell and all the notifications, all that good stuff. And I'll see you again soon. Happy reading! Bye, guys! Bye!